This is a talk, I gave it only once at Bretton Woods, 75 years exactly after they created the modern financial system in that beautiful place in the United States. And it is really about the evolution of information, because I think that blockchain is representing a very important, almost a very complementary step in that evolution. So I want to start with a thought experiment. Let's say humanity is moving to a new planet, and all the people have to be teleported. They can be teleported to the new planet. And we cannot take anything from here but the people. By the way, that is the answer. That should have been another click, but you know. So don't read the last sentence. And so we can move all people there, but we cannot take anything else from here but the people. And let's say that there is a single cargo ship that can take all the people, that can take just one cargo load from Earth to that new planet. Assuming that all the people are fine, there is plenty of food in the new planet, trees and animals, everything is good. And you have a single cargo ship to take from Earth to that planet. And they tasked you with deciding what should be on that ship. What should we take if we can take just one cargo from Earth for the entire humanity? So the answer is there. So I cannot really run the real thing, but the idea is that when you think about it, the only thing that we would take to the new planet is information. Because information is all our history, all our cultures, and it's all our knowledge, and it will be the basis for whatever we will build there. So you can really look at humanity as an information-generating superorganism. This is the most valuable thing that we generate. So when we talk about information, what are we talking about? Information, three things that you can do with information. It can be processed, it can be transferred, and it can be stored. Processing information is what the brain does, right? The brain is something that we share with animals. They process information as well. But what makes us different than animals is that we can very effectively transfer information between each other. That's talking. That makes us unique. Storing information, which we initially did by writing it down, is what separates us from hunter-gatherers. So that definitely was the most important evolutionary step in. Oh, now the animation works. Look at that. Okay. Now, there is the technological aspect of information that came about in the 60s, and it's the exact same three things. First, we had computers that has hardware and software, which were used for processing information. The first computer in the world was just breaking the codes of the Enigma, if you remember that. So the next thing that came after is the networks that allowed computers to communicate to each other. And the next thing after that was the database that allowed shared storage of the information in computers. And the database, since the 60s, have revolutionized every industry that you can think about. All the banks, all the governments, all our affairs are essentially being managed on databases today. So that has been a very important technology. And then there's the third phase, which is a social phase. It's not anthropological, it's not technological, it's social. And in the social phase, we actually talking about standards. And the first standard, because standards, which are mass agreement, which is something that it's not new technology, but it's an agreement about technology. It's a very nuanced but important difference. And the first one was the IBM PC. Most of you probably remember the IBM compatible computer. And that was a standard to how to build an information processing unit. And all of a sudden, thousands of Chinese companies are all manufacturing all those compatible processing units that anyone can write software for, and it would work. And that was the personal computer revolution of the 80s. Then we created a standard for transferring information. Because before the internet, yes, we had networks. We had many networks, private networks, proprietary networks. They were not standard. But all of a sudden we said, you know what? This is how computers should send information to each other. Let's agree on this set of rules. And all of a sudden we have the internet, which is the next revolution. The revolution that came about in, around the year 2000. So if we're dealing with processing, there are two aspects. There's hardware and software. So IBM PC was a standard hardware platform, but the open source movement actually created a set of standards for software. How do you know it's a standard? Because it can be forked. You can fork any open source project and make your own. No one owns it. It's an agreement about what is a Linux. It's an agreement of what is an operating system, an evolving agreement. Just like the internet itself, the protocols are evolving. Standards are evolving. Even the PC standard, added USB, and the standards are always evolving. But when there are standards, when there are a set of rules, when there are mass agreements, it means that no one controls it. It's like the difference between England and English. England is an entity, is an actual physical entity, but English is just an agreement of the meaning of the words. This is why we're able to communicate right now. Something more powerful, may I say decentralized. So the open source movement really, you can think that the IBM PC relieved us from the domination of proprietary hardware platform. The internet relieved that from the domination of the proprietary networks, and the open source project that were built on that relieved that from the proprietary domination of Microsoft, which was the #1 closed source software. Now, I remember in the 90s, no one really could even think about how would anyone be able to beat Microsoft. They're so big. They're the biggest company in the world. They control the operating system, the browser, the backend. They control everything they want to control in software. Who could possibly compete with them? And the answer is no one. No one could compete with them. But everyone can. And that's the meaning of standards of open source. And today, open source is your browser is open source. The servers that you work with against are open source. All the biggest technology companies in the world, like Amazon and Google and Facebook, they're all built on open source software. So it's a big success. So we handle processing, we handle transferring. What about storing? Do we have a standard for storing? And the answer is not yet, but it's forming. And this is what blockchain is all about. So actually, went through that. When we're talking about the monopolies that we have in hardware, in network, in open source, yes, there are many monopolies. But who are the monopolies? Who are the proprietary technologies that are going to be affected by blockchain? And this list of services, the Amazons, the Google, the YouTube, the Facebook of the world, because today they are proprietary information services. They do information storing and processing and storing on their servers, and it's all theirs. And we see it doesn't work. Every day that goes by, people realize that this is obviously too much power that cannot be effectively managed. It's actually bad for the people and for those companies, and for the people that work in those companies. So why standards are important? The reason standards are so important because they take the value that is created by network effects, because that's the definition of network effect, is when you have a network that actually everyone is using, there's a lot of value for that. We gain a lot of value from the fact that everyone's using email, and that everyone is using an SMS-enabled phone, and that everyone is using the internet. We gain a lot of value, or even a fax machine or telephone. But if the service is proprietary, like Facebook, so yes, there's this very strong network effect to Facebook which generate a lot of value. But it's Facebook that benefit from that value. When you have standards, it brings the value that's created by the network effect from the monopolies to the people. So we all have a better service, and we all feel that when you use the internet. Because we have a great service, It's very cheap, and there is no single party that take all the value that is generated by the fact that we all use the internet. It's not like Amazon, it's not like Google, it's not like Facebook in that regard. And that's very important. So, to conclude, we are talking about the last step of essentially creating a standard around the last thing that can be done with information, which is storing it. That was always the key evolution, both in the anthropological evolution, in the technological evolution, and now in the standard evolution. And we're creating a standards that allow storing and processing of information online. It's much bigger than any specific token or currency, or it's much bigger than that. If you think about it, the first computers, they were used to process ledgers and transactions in banks. That's what we did. This is why, I guess, the CEO of IBM said that the world doesn't need more than 5 computers. Why? Because they couldn't see how this thing is being used for so many different things. Because of it, it has a very good, valid first use. But the reality is that, yes, how much each of us owe to each other, which is what we're using currencies and tokens for, is probably a very important aspect of that needs to be stored on databases. And this is where databases, original databases, thrives initially. And this is why the first blockchains are essentially all about moving value and currency. But this is just one example. It's like to say, oh, we use database for bank accounts, so we don't have any other use. That's obviously just the beginning. And we need to remember that we're going to see a lot more things. We're going to see everything move to blockchain. Actually, it's like me saying to you right now, hey, I have my own proprietary network. It's not the internet. It's mine. It's better. You want to use it? I mean, no one in his right mind would even consider that. And the reason is that we have a network. It works. And we know it provides a good service for us. In the future, someone that will offer a service like YouTube or Google or Facebook in a proprietary way, there's no chance that anyone would even use that. Why would you give any single entity so much power? It doesn't make sense. So those startups are going to take over everything. It's like the internet. It's bigger than the internet in that sense. Everything we do today, every information that we transfer is on the internet. Think about that. Any piece of information that we will store in the future will be on the blockchain and will be done as a standard. So this is just the beginning that we're seeing. How much time do I have, by the way? Where's the counter?
Yeah.
Huh? 10? I have 10. Do I want to take a question as well? Or okay, so I will take a question in a second. Now, to say that today there's a lot of hype. There was a lot of hype in 2017, and then it crashed. I'm one of the only people in the world that have been in the center of the internet bubble. I had a social network back then, contact.com. I was in the center of it, and I was definitely in the center of the last one. So I can, draw the analogies. I can make the comparison. I can tell you very clearly that it is the exact same phenomena where everyone is seeing a new technology, that a lot of smart people see it and say, you know what, that's going to change everything. Nothing is going to be the same after this technology is going to propagate. And that was true for the internet. We know that 2 decades later, it changed everything. But a lot of smart people saw that back in '99. And because they all seen it on the same time, they all bought a lot of internet stocks and took the prices to the sky, and then it crashed. And the result was that I was with my social network in 2000, 2001, trying to meet VCs and raise money for my social network, and they all say, didn't you hear the internet is dead? It's a fun? I couldn't raise money. I had to shut down the company. For a social network, 2001, it's crazy. But it's just, as the excitement is so high, the depression is so low. But I'm trying to say, hey, separate. We need to separate ourselves from the hype. and focus on the real content, on the real, and that's what I'm trying to show here, that there's something real in blockchain technology that completes a very long evolution of how we deal with information as a species. In addition, I will finish with one thing. So a lot of people think, blockchain is great, but we don't like Bitcoin, or we don't like tokens, we just like the technology. There's a problem with that. It's kind of inseparable, and I'll tell you why. For me to communicate, information is communicate. So for me to communicate information is free, right? I can talk to you guys here, and it doesn't cost anyone anything that I'm talking. But if we want to store this information, to store this talk, to keep it forever available for anyone to watch, then that's going to have a lot of costs, throughout time. So it depends on for how time we keep it. So unlike information transfer, when we're talking about information storage and making that information that is stored available, there's a cost for that. And someone needs to bear that cost. And that's the difference between internet protocol to blockchain protocol. Because if I'm sending a packet to the internet to somewhere, I cannot rely on that information that I sent on this packet to be there, in the future. But if I'm sending a Bitcoin transaction, and maybe I encode some information in the transaction, I can come in 10 years, and I can know that I can retrieve and look up that information as long as Bitcoin worth something. And the reason is that Bitcoin is using a mechanism where it uses its own token for the people that are posting to the blockchain. They need to use the token, they need to pay with the token. And those who host the network, the miners of Bitcoin, are essentially receiving tokens. And they sell those tokens in the free market in order to fund their operation of storing and making that information available for all of us. And we are going to those markets and we buy the token because we need it, because we want to post transaction to the Bitcoin network. So it creates an ecosystem of value transfer, which is essential when we're talking about storing information and not just transferring it, because it has ongoing cost. And this is why there is no single public blockchain that anyone can point out that is active that is not using a token. Guess what? If it has no token, anyone can spam it to death. Just post trillions of records and cause anyone that hosting that blockchain to crash. This is why those two things are not separable. And this is why, that's part of the reason we saw such massive speculations around those tokens that operate blockchain. But we need even that to put in their place, because by the end of it, a blockchain is a database. It's just a database. It's a great database. It has logic and stored procedures that we call smart contracts, but it's a database. It's a public database, but it's a database. And if today I'm using one database, and anyone that built a system know that it might be inconvenient, but you can change. You can move your information to a new database. It's not like those things. I remember that Oracle was one of the companies that people thought is going to run the world. No, it's a database. It's a database technology. That was a proprietary database technology. Blockchain is a public, but it's not where the value is. So the fact that there is a token and people need that token in order to use the blockchain, and it's being used to fund the operation of the blockchain, does not mean that this token is going to be the next world currency or anything like that. I personally, I think that Saga has more chance to be the next world currency than Bitcoin, because it's working with governments and in a very regulated form. So we need to make that distinction between all those dreams. And you can imagine why someone that has a lot of Bitcoin, one likes to talk about Bitcoin being the world currency, and there's no currency but Bitcoin. You can imagine why they would want a token, but we need to be careful when we buy those kind of visions to the future economy, especially when it comes from engineers rather than economists. But nevertheless, the tokens are critical for the operation of the blockchain. And I'm happy to take some question if anyone has. Otherwise, maybe we'll get the schedule back to.
Eyal, it would be great if you can connect the vision and the information that you gave to the actual influence that can be that we can reach on the ground in developing countries through this technology.
So I think that's a great question, and I think that one of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about impact, and specifically with supporting developing countries, is that there is a lot of talk, and I'm not from this field, but I cannot help but hear that funds are not distributed in always the optimal way to those who could use help. And one of the most important things with blockchain technology is that it is a public database, meaning that it's transparent. That's a very, very powerful property. And by being transparent, it's not only that people cannot, let's say, trick the system, but they are subject to auditing by anyone that wish to audit them, and they are, in effect, creating a system that anyone else can learn from. That's very important, because if everything you do is on a public database, and people can look at how people use the system, whether there's a local currency or a lending group that is running on blockchain, people from all over the world can take all this information, gather it, research it, and build something better, which is how the information industry evolved, by making mistakes and building something better, and again and again and again. Now, not to mention that when we're talking about a next generation financial instruments that can be built on public blockchains, we're talking about an opportunity for anyone in the world to support any other community, anything, and see the result and do it directly with no intermediates in the middle that are necessary because we have so many layers of regulation around financial services today in the world. But today, someone can create some lending group. And lending groups are an amazing phenomena in developing countries where people essentially create their own credits. Anyone can create a lending group, and anyone else in the world can see that, can support that, can even provide credit to that lending group. And the ramifications of that are just mind-boggling. And I've been talking to a lot of people from the impact industry, and you see that again and again. I think that this is an industry that is going to be completely revolutionized by this technology, by the transparency, by the financial disintermediation that it provides, and using new tools of agreements that were never possible before. So if a lending group, for example, is a structure that is based on a set of rules that someone needs to enforce and that has cost and you need to track, all of a sudden you do it public on a public blockchain in a way that uses smart contracts that essentially keeps all the logic of the interaction between the parties in a transparent way that everyone can see the rules of the system and can take part of it from anywhere in the world. So I expect that to have a huge impact on that, as well as other industries in the world. This is a fundamental technology. Like to say, it's almost like to ask, how would the internet affect the impact industry? And take that and multiply that by 10. Because again, the internet is for transferring information. And I don't think that information is the most critical thing that developing country needs. But blockchain allows you to do more than that, not just transfer information, but also transfer value, which really changed the premise of what you can do. Thank you very much.